first urban growth seminar of the semester. And I want to start by thanking important people. First of all, Hilda Blanco with the Center for Sustainable Cities, who has co-sponsored this effort both in the fall and the spring. So thank you, Hilda. Let me thank Bianca Schuliker, right here. Wave your hand a little bit so people can see you, who every detail involved in actually organizing this seminar and making it happen. Bianca is actually the one who really does this, and so I kind of can take credit, but mostly I've had the great pleasure of watching Bianca do a great deal of legwork. Julie Kim, who is not here, has also been quite helpful. Trinidad Banerjee organized this in the fall semester, and so thanks to all those folks. I want to welcome Matt Kahn, who is an environmental economics rock star, to the auditorium today. Matt has really not only published influential work, but in many ways set the mark and established thought leadership on the intersection between economics and climate change and urbanization. Matt earned his Ph.D. in 1993 from the University of Chicago. Currently, he is affiliated with all of these places that you can see right up here on this PowerPoint. UCLA's Institute of the Environment, Department of Economics and Public Policy, Anderson School, the Law School, and the National Bureau of Economic Research. He is a author or co-author of 3 books, Heroes and Cowards, Green Cities, and most recently, Climatopolis. The website Research, R-E-P-E-C, what does that stand for? Research and Economics Papers and something. Well, we don't know what it stands for. We do know that it ranks Matt Kahn among the top 5% of cited authors on a stunningly large number of citation characteristics, too numerous to mention. And I got all this information from Matt's very handy website. So I thank you. You make it very easy for introducers. Among all these things, the thing that I am most impressed by and most grateful to Matt for is that he did spend 2 very important years assisting us at the Journal of Regional Science as a co-editor, and is now on our advisory board of former editors. And so without any further ado, let me welcome Matt Kahn.
Folks, thank you very much
for inviting me here today and showing up. And I'm delighted to be here. And whenever I have the chance to speak, I always try to be interesting and provocative. And there isn't enough time in the day to not be. So I'm watching you to see if this is interesting. Is there any love for UCLA Bruins in this room? Oh, yeah. Am I innocent till proven guilty, or guilty till proven innocent? Where's the burden of proof? Tough crowd. So I'm going to be talking about China today, and I'm hoping that this will be my 4th book. I am in deep thought about these themes, and I'm eager to hear your reactions. If anything I say is provocative or interesting, or if you don't believe a word of it, please send me an email. I can handle the truth. And I have very thick skin over a lifetime of beatings and laying down beatdowns on others. And so please feel free to share your thoughts with me. Folks, we all know that the world is moving to cities. The New York Times just had a piece that a majority of people in China are now living in cities. In the developing world, more and more folks living in cities. In the United States, 80% of us now live in metropolitan areas. Ed Glazer's prominent book, The Triumph of the City, celebrating urban life, coming out recently. I've been very interested in the sustainability consequences of urban growth. So the 3rd bullet point. I celebrate that China is growing at 8% per year, but the New York Times continues to write these full-page articles that this is a Faustian bargain, that an unintended consequence of pursuing such growth is huge levels of pollution and quality of life degradation. And so almost going back to one of the old questions, back to Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, if we live and work in cities, and if the cities raise our income, but if our quality of life is terrible, has our standard of living improved? And that's one of the riddles I want folks thinking about over the next 40 minutes. And so I'm an economist. Is there any love for economists in this room?
Oh, yeah. Sure.
I'm married to an economist. I fear my son will become an economist. I don't need the competition. So when I think about pollution, whether it's air and water pollution or greenhouse gas emissions, I think about supply and demand. Does anyone remember their X? Can I see your Malcolm XX? Tough crowd. I'm going to walk out, Marlon.
Okay, give him time.
All right. I'm always challenging the conventional wisdom. I'm the most optimistic man in America. Some people say the most deluded. But I am a huge fan of capitalism and a proponent of free market environmentalism, which is not an oxymoron. And that will be one of my themes today. But again, I want to put my cards on the table quickly so we can have a discussion and a debate. Folks, how many liked that cover? That was my first book. I said to the Brookings Press, I want a highway going into a forest. They said, okay. And so I thought that was cool. It was translated into Chinese, and I don't read Chinese, but I hope that says my name. Can anyone confirm that? Tough crowd. But I know it's selling billions in China. I receive royalty checks of 7 or 8 RMB on a regular basis. So folks, a very reasonable question is, what is a green city? And you get into index problems. So the deans at UCLA are very worried that USC is a better university than UCLA. How do we rank universities? Is it solely a function of the football team?
Your ranking is correct.
And so we always face questions. What's the best university in Los Angeles? I don't want to hear your answer, but I want to put you in the mood. And Marlon's heckling me already. What's the greener city, Los Angeles or Shanghai? When you have a multi-dimensional object, so in the case of pollution, do we describe Los Angeles by its smog issues, by its greenhouse gas issues, by its water pollution issues? In that sense, I mean that a given geographical location, whether it's Cairo, Beijing, or Los Angeles, is a vector of attributes. You then get into an index weighted issue. If we have objective data for local and global environmental criteria, how do you collapse that into a single index of quality? To answer that, you would have to be very honest about your priorities. If you greatly care about urban particulate levels, you're going to put a lot of weight that Beijing is now a brown city with the fog it now faces. If you greatly care about having a small carbon footprint, then Los Angeles, which has a larger per capita carbon emissions releases than Beijing, in that case, if you prioritize greenhouse gas emissions, then Los Angeles is the brown city. What interests me is for each of these criteria for describing a city's environmental quality, how does it evolve as economic growth takes place? And so since 2006, I've ditched the United States. Given that the action is in the developing world, I've been especially interested in this third bullet point. What are the unintended environmental consequences of urban growth for local and global pollution challenges in the developing world? And with my co-authors at Tsinghua University in Beijing, have written several peer-reviewed papers about China. We all know that urbanization offers many benefits. So is anyone upon graduating going to, maybe some of you are, is anyone planning to live in a farming community upon graduation? Any of the faculty thinking of, all right. So you're voted with your feet that cities are where it's at. We all know that cities facilitate trade and learning. There's benefits of not being a Robinson Crusoe, of what a Los Angeles offers in terms of your productivity and in terms of your quality of life. I have been interested in the dark side of urbanization, whether it's crime, whether it's pollution, the social costs of living in cities. And that's been a big theme in my work. And so something that interests me very much in the case of the continent of Asia, as Asia urbanizes, will non-market quality of life suffer? Or could it actually get better along some of the dimensions we care about from a public health perspective? Folks, I've always been tracking 3 dimensions of urban growth. More people living in the city, people becoming richer in those cities, and people spreading out, suburbanization or sprawl in these cities. The tricky piece of algebra I have on the brain is, as all three of these patterns occur in China, which local urban pollution challenges will get better, which will get worse, and what will happen to greenhouse gas emissions. So this is an ambitious statistical agenda rooted in microeconomics. And as a microeconomist, I'm always focused on incentives. I'll come back to Jared Diamond and footprints in a little while, but what economists bring to the table, besides for some knowledge of statistics, is our focus in a Freakonomics sense on incentives, and that there's ways to harness capitalism to achieve environmental progress during a time of growth. Folks, why do green cities matter? We know that urbanization, we wouldn't have Google or Facebook or the cell phones in your pocket without cities. Our ability to generate ideas comes from close proximity and from learning from each other. I'm a believer that the reason Detroit is poor right now is because they can't attract and retain the skilled. Those cities, this comes back to Ed Glazer's work, those cities that can attract and retain the skilled have a bright future. Chicago is cold, but it is able to attract and retain the skilled. And Chicago and Detroit's paths have diverged. Yes, car manufacturing has collapsed in Detroit, but New York used to have such manufacturing, and it reinvented its game. I believe that those cities that can attract and retain the skilled have a bright future. And that's one of the reasons I'm optimistic about Los Angeles, even though our industrial base right now is a little bit up in the air. I've argued throughout my career that a city's greenness, its day-to-day quality of life, is a key determinant of those cities with high quality of life have a higher probability of attracting and retaining the skilled. And we're going to come back again and again to greenhouse gas emissions. So folks, China's pollution challenges are well known. Let me read to you these things from the World Bank. This is common knowledge. China has some of the world's most polluted cities right now. The second bullet point, only 1% of China's urbanites live in cities that satisfy the EU's air quality standards. That's horrible stuff. My friends who are professors at Beijing, in Beijing, tell me stories of keeping their children inside on polluted days, and how they live their lives to try to minimize their exposure to the outdoor challenges they face. Pollution there's objective evidence of horrible air pollution in China right now at the local level. At the global level, there's the common belief that urbanization will scale up Asia's greenhouse gas emissions. From basic economics, there's no price on carbon emissions, and so the following logic plays out. If urbanization makes you richer, and if richer people consume more fossil fuels and more other resources, then we get more greenhouse gas emissions. The joke I like to crack at UCLA is if everybody had a Hummer and drove that 10,000 miles a year, there would be much more greenhouse gas emissions, and you're more likely to achieve that in an urban setting. So folks, here's some data from the World Bank. Time goes from 1960 out to 2009. I'm graphing per capita carbon dioxide emissions. What I show you are three lines. I give you India is the squares, that bottom line. I show you China, which is the triangle line, and I give you the world. Folks, do you see the convergence? Take a look at China. Don't look at my ugly face. Look at China. Does anyone see a regime shift? Does the slope look constant over 1960 to 2010? Does anyone see that sharp left turn after the year 2000? And so that's the challenge. China has now overtaken the average. And so the question I want you thinking about is, right now there are no incentives, no carbon tax, some regulation to reduce carbon emissions. But in the absence of capitalism, when there is no explicit incentive to reduce emissions, you face sustainability challenges. So China right now faces high urban air pollution and accelerating greenhouse gas emissions. Is the world going to hell? A linear extrapolator would say yes. It's already polluted. Their people are getting richer. They're just going to consume more stuff, more coal, more cars, more McDonald's, more pollution. That's a linear extrapolation. Everyone driving their Hummer with the motorization in China taking place right now, more carbon dioxide. But folks, do I have any optimists in this room? Yes, we can. I got 3, 4, 5.
Matt, can I ask an optimistic question?
No. There will be plenty of time for that once I get my free lunch. And so it's...
Can I ask a non-optimistic question about the graph?
Yes.
What is the units over here on the...
So these are tons per capita.
Tons per capita.
Marlon, go ahead.
Well, after 2000, during the sharp upturn in China's emissions, just looking at it, the world per capita emissions went up, but not nearly as much. And so China's a sixth of the world's population. I'm curious, something is going on in the rest of the world. Is it just a dramatic slowing in the increase? Is it actually a drop? I mean, for the per capita global emissions to stay where they're at while China's increasing.
U.S. emissions have been flat, Europe's have been flat.
Okay,
and that's but you're doing some good arithmetic in your head.
I'm looking at a graph.
Yeah, I think what Marlon is asking is that you need world minus China. See what that's like.
See, well, this is why USC is dominating UCLA. And so if invited back, I will bring that graph. But now we do it my way, baby. Optimism. This is in your face. You ever been dunked upon? I can no longer. But here it comes. Apparently in China, there's educated young people. Are there any Chinese students here at USC?
You're not kidding.
UCLA is filled with terrific young scholars. I receive emails on a daily basis saying, I've read all of your papers, you are a giant. I email back, you've got the wrong dude. And they say, I want to come study with you. Tough crowd. And their education, many young environmentalists forget, they don't ask, where did the income come from? It's not that people win the lottery and all of a sudden they're a millionaire. In modern capitalism, you earn your income because you have high human capital. And more educated people, there is rising educational attainment in China. We see this at all the US leading universities right now as their best students want to be here. A consequence, a direct consequence of rising education in China, and this is a theme in my own work, is rising environmentalism and a rising demand for green cities. Too many environmentalists, and I battle a lot of people at my institute, associate income with just raw consumption. But that income is earned from educational attainment. And that is true in many cases. I was going to crack a Mitt Romney joke, but all of his degrees are from Harvard. And he went on to earn that money, and now he earns it off this interest he earned. But we can come back to Mitt Romney. Richer, more educated people demand green cities. You're more patient. You have a higher demand for non-market quality of life. As people move to cities, they have smaller families. From basic Gary Becker's work on demography, when women have more labor market opportunities, they have fewer children. There's been a transition in Vietnam. Previous generations had 6 children. They now have 3 children. In China and the United States, women who work are more educated, marry later, and have smaller families. And this translates into a smaller carbon footprint. Ed Glazer and I have done extensive work on point number 4. When people live in cities at high population density, they have a higher carbon footprint. Does anyone here live near USC? I would want to know how you get here and how your carbon footprint in terms of apartment and how you get here compares to those who live at the periphery. China so far has not been willing to sign international treaties like the Kyoto Protocol to reduce its carbon emissions. I predict that as India and China grow richer, they will be more of a player at the international table, being willing to sign carbon mitigation treaties at the international level. There'll be more symmetry across the players. Finally, the hallmark of capitalism are new products. Whether it's Air Jordans, whether it's Facebook, the hallmark of capitalism is new products. Diet Coke, think of a product that you like and ask how many years has it been around? Could your grandfather have bought it? The hallmark of capitalism is new products. I am highly optimistic that endogenous technological change, which is just a fancy word for new products, we're going to figure out how to make electric cars, which will break the link between gasoline consumption and private vehicle use. We're going to make tremendous progress in renewable technology like wind and solar. And China and India are going to play a key role here. They already are in exporting these technologies. So the rise of China as an urban intellectual powerhouse with 1.3 billion people creates billions of lottery tickets. Not everyone in China is terrific. Not everyone in the US is terrific, as I remind my students. But we need just a couple of folks to be at the Mark Zuckerberg level and for them to come up with a game-changing idea that can broadly diffuse. And that's part of my optimism about capitalism. The challenge. As shown by the United States experience, Los Angeles was a hellhole in terms of pollution 30 years ago. But you can make dramatic progress in air and water pollution during a time of growth. The challenge is with greenhouse gas emissions, where because we don't have a price, because if you drive a Hummer, you don't face a carbon tax, there's no explicit incentive right now to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions. So folks, this was meant as a joke. When I want to put my UCLA students to sleep, and they often need a nap, I hit them with the following algebra. How much pollution is there in Los Angeles? We need to multiply the following terms together. It depends on how many people live in the city. How much pollution is there from transportation? Is the product of how many people, N, live in the city? What's their probability of owning a car? If they own a car, how many miles do they drive at M? And this technique effect, how many gallons of gas per mile of driving, G, or that could be emissions per mile. So folks, take a look at that product, N times P times M times G. As we grow richer, are emissions going to go up or down? Many young people hold G constant and say, well, N's going to get bigger as more people move to the bright lights of the city. More people are going to buy cars P, and then they're going to drive them more M. And so the scale of capitalism, N times P times M, all mean more pollution. Our only shot at having a greener capitalism during a time of growth is for G, whether that's emissions per mile of driving or whether it's the inverse of miles per gallon, for that to fall over time. And so but let me show you a nice picture. So this is the California experience with respect to ozone from 1980 till 2001. Each of these circles is a monitoring station. So California has a very rich set of pollution monitors. I'm giving you every monitoring station in California, the empirical distribution. The higher you are on parts per million, the more polluted is a given geographic location. Folks, during a time when our income doubled or tripled, notice that the whole empirical distribution, air pollution is falling sharply during a time of growth. There is no law of physics that we will have to have pollution during a time of growth. Our population grew, so folks, it's even more than this. California's population grew and its per capita income grew, but look at how sharply pollution fell. Look at the 99th percentile of the pollution distribution in 2001, and notice that was the median level of pollution in 1980. You're supposed to be impressed. I didn't do that, I just made the graph. What happened? California's Sacramento's Air Resources Board deserves a fair bit of credit. A richer nation can enforce and enact regulation to make significant progress. So in the case of ozone, it was emissions per mile of driving falling 99%. New vehicles being much cleaner than older vehicles. Engineers at the leading car manufacturers figuring out how to build the catalytic converter so that there was much lower emissions. And so if you are the mayor of a Chinese city, you will face some challenges if you want greener cities. Do you limit the population using a hukou system? Do you slow down economic development? We know that that's not going to happen. The mayors are rewarded for economic growth. Are you going to raise the price of natural resources, discouraging people from driving? You might improve public transit. Beijing has made major investments. Bullet trains are being built. I think the major path you're going to see is this last bullet point of encouraging the development and diffusion of green technology. And a richer, larger, educated nation has a greater opportunity for such breakthroughs. But as an economist, it's our job to think about the benefits and costs of each of these in trying to reach the goal of greener cities. And I do want you to take away that California, the environmental progress that we have made in California is, and my mother always says, Matthew, beware wishful thinking. But California is a salient data point for those, and it did take some government regulation. But that California is an example of achieving the win-win of economic growth and improvements in environmental quality. And the rest of the world can learn from what California did right and wrong. Folks, here's another one. This is the famous Rosenfeld curve. This is California again. Everything I'm going to say after this slide will be focused on China. I wanted to give you, so this was an example about local pollution. This is an example about greenhouse gas emissions. Before the year 1973, California, the mustard line, its per capita electricity consumption was basically parallel with the rest of the US. Less than the rest of the US, less air conditioning, more temperate climate. Does everyone see the divergence in our per capita electricity consumption relative to the rest of the nation? This matters for greenhouse gas emissions because we produce our electricity using natural gas, which is half as dirty as coal, but still a fossil fuel. So the optimism I want you to see here is during a time of economic growth from 1973 till 2004, there's been no increase in per capita electricity consumption. And so this is an example, and several factors underlie this. We can talk about industrial composition, we can talk about energy efficiency standards, but this is another example to show you in capitalism, we can break the link between resource consumption and economic growth. I meet non-economists who think that there's laws of physics, that pollution just scales linearly with economic activity. That's false. And so these two slides are meant to get folks to think. And these are many battles I have at UCLA with well-meaning young people who need to think more about the dark arts of economics and incentives. With my co-authors at Tsinghua, and we need to update this, we have been looking at pollution across China's cities. And there's very different results. In some cities, you see environmental progress in this very short panel from 2003 to 2006. PM10 is particulate matter. The New York Times is emphasizing that we need to switch over to a PM 2.5 standard, and China is going to switch over to reporting that. So the New York Times has had a very cynical set of articles saying that at the US Embassy that they're taking much higher PM 2.5 readings than what the Chinese authorities are reporting based on PM 10 readings. But in fairness to the Chinese government, China will soon begin to report PM 2.5 measurements. And so there's a very interesting issue of being discussed of whether the Communist Party is honestly measuring pollution and how it reports it to its people. If the cities weren't green, would the people ever know this? And we can come back to microblogs and dissemination of information in my remaining time. But we have been looking across Chinese cities at which cities are having declining pollution and why. Folks, if you sit down and read our peer-reviewed papers, I want to show you a couple of things. And I don't want to hypnotize folks with econometrics, but I want to make a couple of points come across. What we did in a paper that came out in Regional Science and Urban Economics 2 years ago was the following. We asked which cities in China have the highest ambient pollution as measured by particulate matter and by sulfur dioxide. And here are the findings that come out. If you have a larger population in your city, you have more pollution. So take a look at that coefficient of, in column 5 of 0.406. That says that all else equal, if a city has 10% more people, its sulfur dioxide level is 4.1% higher. Just a log regression for folks who love their linear statistics. Any lovers of linear statistics? But hold that constant. Here's what's interesting. Folks, take a look at this horribly defined variable, CFDI IPC. What a horrible name, and that was my idea. That's foreign direct investment per capita into the city. In those cities that have more foreign direct investment, we find a negative correlation with ambient pollution. The pollution haven literature has posited that when developing countries trade with the West, that we, the West, send them our dirty industries. That would predict we should see a positive coefficient on FDI. But what we believe is going on here is those cities that are attracting more foreign direct investment are modernizing. And it probably is also correlated with human capital flowing into that city. The other variable I want to show you is income and income squared. In those, notice the concave relationship. We're finding that in the richest cities in China, further economic development means greener cities. And this is back to this environmental Kuznets curve literature. So we're trying to do a statistical analysis of the performance of Chinese cities. I want to say some points about urban planning. For major Asian cities, what are the opportunities and challenges for achieving green growth? So in the transportation sector, we know that Asia's cities, that billions of cars are being bought. Folks, China has passed Euro 4 standards for new vehicles. And so emissions per mile could go down very sharply now that the new vehicles will reach Europe's emission standards. Only a nation that's getting richer can achieve that. With respect to industry, getting ready for the 2008 Beijing Olympics, the central government made Beijing's dirty industries leave Beijing. There's a very interesting issue of how urban planning in Asian cities, will it move the dirtiest industries away from population centers? From a public health point of view, we want dirty activity to occur in rural areas. If your goal is to minimize population exposure, we shouldn't be nuclear testing in Los Angeles. Just common sense. We see in Asia's cities a decentralization of dirty activity, shutting down industry in highly populated areas and moving it to other cities. I call this the domestic pollution haven effect, that in the rich superstar cities of Beijing and Shanghai, you will see less industrial activity. It is true that in those cities that attract the dirty industries, that pollution will rise there. There's a philosophical question. If there's one dirty factory, would a social planner prefer that it be in a less populated area? There'd be fewer victims exposed. And so we can come back to that. The power sector. Right now, China heavily relies on coal to make much of its electricity, and the demand for electricity is huge. Burning coal creates both local air pollution issues and greenhouse gas emissions. But if China makes progress at renewable power, wind and solar, there's the possibility of swapping out some of this coal-fired power for these renewables. And so I'm optimistic, and I've argued in the New York Times that trade between China and the United States in renewable power equipment could actually lead to a sharp reduction in that emissions factor. Buildings are major consumers of electricity. I think there's a very promising field of architecture. I have been told by my Chinese co-authors that electricity prices are low in China to promote growth. An unintended consequence of low electricity prices is to discourage energy efficiency. If there were higher energy prices, if you allowed free market scarcity to allow that price to bounce around, there would be more green buildings being built. Urban form. I know there's many urban planners here today. Right now, Beijing is a much more compact city than Los Angeles. As Beijing becomes richer, will the rich, like Yao Ming, I was in his building, he didn't want to see me, will the rich continue to live downtown? Many people in America live and work in the suburbs. Suburbanized employment. I'm very interested in China's cities. Will employment stay downtown, or will employment move to the suburbs? Right now, urban people in China live in apartments. Do they have the American dream? Do they want to live in single-family homes like we do? Or as they grow richer, will they continue to be content living in apartments? This has crucial issues for sustainability and environmental challenges, but we need to know their preferences to predict likely outcomes. So we've already spoken about many of these, but this is what I've been up to, and I'm going to try to finish in the next 5 minutes. In my own research agenda on China, I've been trying to answer the following questions. Using revealed preference methods like real estate prices, migration behavior, across China's cities, how much do urbanites value green amenities? Is this premium rising over time? Across China's major cities, what are the best cities to live in? I've been also very interested in the carbon footprint across different Chinese cities. I haven't made much progress on question number 5. How will climate change affect different Chinese cities? And how will local politicians invest to protect their cities? An important idea from urban economics. The hukou system is starting to be relaxed in China. If Los Angeles's quality of life went to hell, a professor, there are several professors in the room who I've seen have wanted to leave as I've been talking. If Los Angeles's quality of life goes to hell, you can often move to another city. 3% of Americans switch states every year. One way in Asia to protect individuals' quality of life is to increase the competition among cities so that people can vote with their feet to move to that city which offers the best quality of life for them. I've already alluded to this point that industry is on the move within China. And if there's some cities that are specializing, that their golden goose is dirty industries, young workers will have to decide, how do they trade off a high-paying job, but in a dirty city versus all other alternatives? But migration offers the opportunity. The potential to migrate is an insurance policy to protect urbanites in Asia that Americans, we have over 300 major cities, already have. My optimism. We've already done this, but I'll do it again. I'm often told in China about 4-2-1 of the transition of 4 grandparents having 1 grandchild. When you only have 1 grandchild, I see how my parents act with my son. They have 2 grandchildren now, but for a while my son was their only grandchild. In a world where you only have 1 grandchild, and where pollution exposure can degrade health and slow down child development, you put all your eggs in one basket. You have very strong incentives for the next generation because pollution can so endanger human development at an early age. And Janet Curry has done some of the leading work on this point. Because green cities isn't merely about sunbathing. If you're exposed to urban lead, of that damaging your IQ, and you not having the same success as a young person, and as Jim Heckman says, learning begets learning, skill begets skill. If you don't get off to a good start as a young person, you're not going to learn it. And in the market economy, you won't have the human capital to compete. And so I believe that green city, it's a crucial input in health and human capital to be an effective person. As people in Asia travel to the US, there is a guinea pig learning effect to open up your eyes of what is possible. We've already spoken about the green export market. International trade will be a friend, not a foe, of green cities. As international trade allows for products like wind turbines, electric cars, solar panels, for low cost to be achieved and for these products to widely diffuse. And I've already mentioned the synergies between human capital and being healthy. So my optimism, and I've already outed myself as a free market environmentalist, there are challenges. If the price of cars falls and the price of importing cars is falling, that raises the greenhouse gas and local pollution challenges. If we don't put a price of carbon, if we don't have a carbon tax, that poses a serious challenge to green cities. I've already stressed my optimism that world trade is a force for good in greening our capitalist economy. A word on government before I wrap up. In my own work, with my libertarian leanings, I have emphasized at length that there's cases where government is a foe of sustainability. I'll give an example. Have any of you ever wondered why there's so much green grass and swimming pools in Los Angeles? This is supposed to be a drought climate. How much do we pay for a gallon of water in LA? Less than we pay for a gallon of Budweiser. It's a ½ cent a gallon. When you have government, there's interesting, when government or quasi-government organizations make it preclude that the price of scarce commodities can rise, then people have no incentive to economize on that resource. And so we're more likely to get hybrids and fuel-efficient vehicles when the price of gas goes up. Dick Cheney would purchase a Prius if he thought the price of gas would be $10 a gallon. But if you say that the price of water is going to be a ½ cent a gallon, we're going to have green grass and swimming pools as far as the eye can see, and in a drought climate, supply and demand won't be in balance. But in that case, that's an example of government being a foe of sustainability, of not allowing prices to float. Folks, I presented these arguments at UCLA 2 weeks ago, and some of the world's best astrophysicists were in the room going bananas. These are brilliant men who have not studied much microeconomics. And these guys are good friends of mine. Let me summarize what we said, since you guys aren't laughing. And so I didn't charge for this talk. We talked shark fin soup. They said, Matt, you're charming. I said, thank you. They said, you know, you're right about many of the urban challenges you foresee. But as China gets richer, so Ben Zuckerman focused on shark fin soup, something I've never had before, but he wouldn't stop talking about it for 25 minutes. He said, an unintended consequence of China growing richer is that every creature, basically a tragedy of the commons problem, every creature in the ocean will be fished out, and that there will be collapse. And so this was echoing some of Jared Diamond's work in Collapse of sort of linear extrapolation of if there's 7 billion people and if each of them has $10,000 and if each of them wants to eat 5 fish with their $10,000, then we can multiply those together and that equals 10 quadrillion fish and the world is over. That violates supply and demand. If everyone in India and China achieves the American dream in terms of living in a city and getting richer, if demand soars for shark fin soup, for gasoline, don't forget your supply curve. If we have trouble supplying those commodities, the price will rise. If the price of shark fin soup rises as Chinese urbanites demand more, what happens next? An economist would say there'll have to be substitution to tofu soup. So maybe some future Mark Zuckerberg from USC will come up with a shark fin imitation soup. Could be made out of Bruins. That was a joke. But that is how capitalism innovates. A price goes up that sends a signal to smart nerds that there is something scarce in the economy and there's sharp incentives. You could make a fortune if you could come up with a substitute for shark fin soup. So some of my colleagues at UCLA who are brilliant physicists are pessimistic that we can't reinvent our game, that we won't reinvent our game even when we have strong incentives to do so. The first idea in economics is given enough time and given enough expectation, our innovators can and will come up with substitutes. And so we don't end up in Jared Diamond's, we don't run off a cliff unintentionally, in part because of expectations of future entrepreneurs. So to wrap up, green cities achieve high marks for local and global greenhouse gas emissions. The US has had great success on local pollution, but no success on global warming. We are the villain of greenhouse gas emissions. China, I predict, its producer cities are going to make this transition to being high quality of, many of its cities are going to make a transition to being high quality of life consumer cities. For both the US and China to be low carbon cities, we're going to need game-changing green tech, whether it's the electric car and that power coming from wind and solar. Because ideas are public goods, international trade and international collaboration is the key to these game changers. And folks, I, in the name of time, am going to skip my work on adaptation to climate change, but let me end by saying I greatly fear climate change, and the point of Climatopolis is that economic development actually helps us to adapt to climate change by giving us the resources to deal with the challenges that Mother Nature will pose. And so the irony of Climatopolis is that urban growth has caused climate change, all the greenhouse gas emissions. But because urban growth makes us richer, it gives us the resources to adapt to many of the challenges we will face. Marlon, thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. In terms of logistics, somewhere in the room there's a sign-in sheet. And when it has name, other information. If you could find that, does someone know where the sign-in sheet is? And if not, Bianca, we might circulate a new one. Because everyone should sign in. It's important for record keeping. Thank you, Matt. Before we go to the discussant, you've helped me answer a question that I've always wondered about. Why is it that I don't water my yard with Budweiser? And I now understand that the water is cheaper. Let me introduce our discussant now, Professor Hilda Blanco, who directs the Center for Sustainable Cities here at USC. Prior to that, she was at the University of Washington in the urban planning faculty for several years, including 7 years chairing that department. She has done extensive work in the field of climate change herself. She's a lead author on one of the chapters in the recent IPCC report, Working Group Number 3. If I knew more, I would know what Working Group Number 3 is.
Mitigation.
Mitigation. See, and also a lead author on for the National Climate Assessment on the Southwest region. And so, Hilda, thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Well, I want to thank Matt, first of all, for coming here. It was probably some kind of commute. Did you?
I free rode. Bianca brought me in.
Oh, very good. Okay. A very stimulating and insightful discussion. I know a little bit about China. Back, I think from '89 to '92, I participated in a joint U.S.-China study of urban land reforms during the 1980s. And this was with Cass researchers and the Institute for Trade and Finance Economics. And we came up with recommendations that were then implemented and so on. And most recently, my work in China is with Xinhua, a colleague, working on climate change mitigation, and in particular greenhouse gas inventory assessments. We want to figure out what kind of comparable greenhouse gas inventory methods would be useful at the urban scale, because there are different urban scales and so on, and all of that. So I've been looking into that. And of course, he's been looking at low carbon cities and some of the demonstration programs in several cities and so on. I think that I agree with much of what you say. I think my optimism is a little bit more guarded, I guess, because I think that China faces greater challenges than, let's say, we did in our development towards less air pollution in our cities and so on. For example, I think that the U.S. had a longer time to actually make that transition than China really should have, because we do need change within the next, I think, 10 or 20 years to make a good difference for climate change. And yet the U.S. had, 30, 40 years or so to make those changes. And I think also the problem, which you did cover, of industrial cities. The fact is that we deindustrialized most of our cities during that period of time and so on. And China is still industrializing. It's true that Beijing and Shanghai and some other cities may be exporting their industries, but nevertheless is a lot of industry. And that will be, I think, a great challenge for cities in China as they try to reduce their air pollution as well as reduce their carbon emissions and so on. So I do think we have to, we have to recognize that it's going to be a much greater challenge altogether. On the other hand, I do think that China is moving to make industries and other sectors much more energy efficient. And so it will reduce its carbon emissions. The real issue is how quickly, and so on. I think, you know, there are a number of issues here that you touched on that I think are important, especially for planners. The issue of land and land conversion that also drives urbanization is really important. So it's not really just an urban problem. It's obviously a rural problem as well. People are flocking to the cities because there are very few opportunities in rural areas. And at the same time, some of the best agricultural land surrounding cities is being converted to urban uses. And I mean, even cities are using this land conversion, almost a condemnation, as a major source to fuel urbanization. I think a couple of years ago in an urban development conference in China, several of the Chinese researchers pointed out that many Chinese cities, about 30% of their budgets are really financed by these land conversions of rural land to urban uses and so on. And so this issue of both the rural-urban problem, I think, as well as the land conversion issue are really crucial for urbanization and also creating green cities altogether. One thing, I think I'll mention the fact that China is beginning to pay attention to how it can somehow or another begin to develop new models of dealing with rural people and rural land. I think there is a demonstration project, CAFCO, in the south of Beijing that's being designed by Arup that is, you know, absolutely fascinating. They are providing opportunities for the farmers to actually continue to farm and still develop part of the area for, you know, high-rise development and so on. So China is beginning to figure out how to deal with this. But I think these are issues that, in a real sense, maybe we had a much longer time to deal with them in the US. And China has this, I think, very compressed time frame to try to solve these problems. And I think everybody wants to ask you questions, so I'm going to stop at this point. Okay, thank you.
I share your opinion, obviously. But I wonder if you would like to address the understanding of microeconomics who believes in market and capitalism. You left out these two other variables that affect outcomes. One is the state and civil society. And the question is whether China would be better off achieving this transformation with a non-democratic, autocratic state, because sometimes democratic democracies could cause all kinds of problems. Or is that a explanation of that in your scenario or forecast?
So, Marlon, should I collect questions, or can I jump in?
I'm just here in case you need help. No questions.
Thank you very much for those comments. I'm very sympathetic to what you said. Knowing my time constraint, I chopped out the slides that would have addressed your question. I'd like to spend a minute there. There was a James Bond movie where the villain was a Rupert Murdoch who controlled the media. Did anyone see that movie? Pierce Bronson? And so I want to take us back. A tough crowd. At UCLA, I get laughs. People know I'm out the door if they don't laugh. But here I'm not going to be invited back, so I guess it doesn't matter. But it's, yes.
We may invite you back.
If a monopolist state who does not face election and can use repression to keep dissent down, can those who demand green cities have voice? I'm very sympathetic that if there were competitive elections in China, if a Mayor Villaraigosa lets this city go to hell, he lets Kobe Bryant retire, he stops picking up garbage, he'll lose the tax base. People will vote with their feet and they'll vote him out of office. Of how that sort of accountability holds politicians' feet to the fire in democracies. And there's also the Los Angeles Times doing its muckraking of where there is malfeasance. A fascinating question is, in the case of China, civil society. Robert Kennedy Jr. with the River Keepers has played a crucial role in New York, keeping people informed of what General Electric had done to the local water. And reporting, using money he had collected to hire lawyers to investigate in a Silkwood legal action sense. And there's always a happy ending in these movies. Nobody's laughing, Marlon. But that's how civil society disciplines politicians. In China, will something similar happen? My friend Casey Mulligan wrote a very controversial paper that no economist believes, that dictatorships have the same policies as democracies because the dictator worries, even the dictator worries about losing power and thus has incentives to please the median voter. That paper made everyone wild, and I will drop that. I was not his co-author. But with the rise of microblogs, the recent milk scandal, the recent bullet train scandal, shows that the Chinese government does not have a monopoly on information. Yes, microbloggers will have to register their names now, but there are millions, perhaps billions of smart people in China who want to know the truth and want to know whether their government is working for them. And the good news is information technology. There's a synergy between being educated and information technology that makes it harder for a state to have a monopoly on information. There's a question of what is done by civil society. I was told with the milk scandal that it took some very gutsy behavior by a couple of individuals to report that the state-owned enterprises were adding certain chemicals into the milk. But you only need a couple of heroes. Don't look to me to be a hero. So this is a very important question, but my Chinese co-authors are very optimistic that the microblogs will be a very healthy disciplining device, and that politicians, the interesting thing will be, will the Beijing government reward those politicians who act in the interest of the median voter? In that case, you'd begin to align the incentives of ambitious members of the party to take actions to green the cities. If the mayors solely get promoted based on GNP growth, then they don't have the right incentives to pursue green cities. But the example I gave of the US Embassy measuring PM 2.5 and contradicting the state is an example of civil society raising information and forcing the state to address these issues.
So, at risk of taking the Ben Zuckerman role, I'm with the Spatial Sciences Institute here. I'm an ecologist. And I think that not just Ben, but most, if not all, ecologists and physical scientists would disagree with your big picture. And it's not because we don't understand incentives. In fact, we probably understand incentives better than economists because it's called evolution, evolutionary pressures. And we don't just boil it down to one variable, the dollar. We recognize that there are multiple incentives at any given time that lead to the process of evolution. So it's not that we don't get that there's incentives. Where we get off the boat is that you've given a whole lecture here that actually never mentions the underlying biophysical system that allows all these things to happen. You didn't mention biodiversity once. You didn't mention sort of ecosystem services once. And in fact, every single one of the things that you mentioned as being green are really just about quality of life. And I have no doubt that humans will work very hard and have very high incentives to provide high quality of life for themselves, and that will go up as they get richer. But that does not, in fact, solve the underlying problem that we're facing as a society, and it's not one that these financial incentives can actually handle. because we already know from history that financial incentives about rarity are insufficient to stop extinction and ecosystem destruction.
But Travis, let me push back.
Let me finish. Because energy consumption over the long run is directly correlated with extinction and ecosystem degradation. Even the energy efficiency here, you haven't talked about there being a cap on total appropriation of net primary productivity by humans, both present and past. And until that point comes, there's not going to be ample signals for us to change our course. And all of this stuff is really just sort of humans making their own environments better and not about the underlying sustainability of civilization.
So if the themes that I've pointed out here are true, world population growth will slow. The Paul Ehrlich issue will start to vanish because of urbanization. If we live closer to cities, our carbon footprint will fall, especially if we become more productive. There's some truth to what Travis said, that cities import all sorts of services from outside, and that footprint, in a Wackernagel sense, should be taken into account. But there are ways to configure our society. So imagine if our solar panels and wind turbines could be productive enough, and I know I'm perhaps jumping through laws of physics. If they were productive enough, we wouldn't need to devote that much land to wind turbines or solar panels, and that would free it up for Travis's creatures. What I would say is this. I'm going to come back to free market environmentalism. If Travis is right, and there's certain biodiversity areas that are at risk, there was the experiment in the south of Chile where a multi-billionaire wanted to purchase up a large share of Chile and leave it as a national park where nobody could touch it. But the Chilean government viewed this as international interference and did not allow him to buy this land. So the key to anticipate Travis's concern is for there to be enough capital to sequester the natural capital that he points to, so that we don't pass a critical threshold. Because it would be horrible if the ecologists knew where was the key threshold, and if the naive economists, capitalists, and their economists who are on their payroll help them run right past that point of no return. Even I would find that to be terrible. And so the key is and he is right, that with my focus on cities, one should track what cities are importing, but I'm optimistic that there's a way to configure economic growth to begin to reduce that impact. But I would put it on the ecologists to come up with indicators of, and I know this is what ecologists do, to be tracking what is happening to biodiversity. And if we know, in a Rumsfeld sense, if we know that we don't know where is the point of no return, if we're risk averse, then we build in certain insurance to make sure we don't get there. But shrinking the world's population would make me more optimistic that we won't pass this threshold that Travis may be right about.
I think Adam is next.
Matt, you mentioned that you thought China was going to escape the time path of the environmental Kuznets curve. And it strikes me that an increased manufacturing base is such a strong force that they're not likely to be able to do that in the near future. For instance, the US transportation emissions have gone up the last 2 decades, manufacturing has gone down, because we've become more of an advanced society as well as improving our technology, but China's still at that takeoff stage with regard to its economic structure.
Oh, I agree with you. So if I had had more time, and if this had been a pure economics audience, what I would have said is that there's going to be 2 equilibria across China's cities. So what I meant to say here in this 3rd bullet point, which I kind of skipped, is there's going to be divergence. I predict there's going to be divergence within China's system of cities. There is going to be, say in the United States, we've got our Pittsburgh and Cleveland, our Gary, Indiana, and we have coastal cities where you run into USC and Ivy League types and these other cities. You're going to see something similar in China of different cities specializing in different functions. From basic urban economics, no city is a microcosm of the nation as a whole. Los Angeles is about tourism and Hollywood. New York is about finance and media. Different cities specialize in different things. I think Adam is right that you're going to see some of these 2nd and 3rd tier cities in the poorest provinces in China specializing in some of these, the rare earths, some of the tough industries. But in a world where workers can choose, if you relax the hukou system and allow workers to self-select where they want to live and work, I feel less sorry for them. They're free to choose where they live their life. There's no free lunch. LA has very high home prices to live in paradise. You can buy a home in Detroit for $14,000. There are trade-offs in market capitalism. So I'm with Adam. I did not say that every city in China is going to become a paradise. I think what you're going to see is in the skilled, in the skilled cities, you're going to see this separating equilibrium where you're going to see a convergence between these cities and a Los Angeles, and he's quite right that I think we're going to see divergence, that some of these other cities will grow dirtier as they become heavy industry cities, or remain so, as the mayor of such cities has little incentive to reduce pollution there because he anticipates that the golden goose for that city is the dirty industry. And so I think it's very important to track the economics and the political economy here of when you're in equilibrium.
We'll go here, and then we'll work our way in that direction. So you, yeah.
Okay. This is something about the population and the 4 to 1. But I want to add something to it, that it's not about only decreasing the size of the family. It is one another thing that right now we used to live in larger houses, even though those houses may use less energy per square feet, but the people who live in those area, they need more larger houses, and they do it. It happened 1985 to 2004 that shows that at least 20% in United States, the size of the house or area per capita has increased, and it's something that's happening in China will happen there as well. The other thing is that the people will start a more urbanist life. They may get involved in more activity that needs energy, because the same thing has happened for the commercial area, that the per capita it has increased at least 20%. So means that everyone use more energy in-house, more energy in commercial space, and other activities like entertainment and transportation.
So you're right. I mean, Kobe Bryant lives in a much bigger house than I do. Urbanization makes you richer, and richer people consume more resources. And so that, I absolutely agree. So that's what I was trying to say in these bottom 2 bullet points here. Urbanization. Ed Glazer says that the same person, if she moved from a rural place to a city, earns 35% more, and then that maps into having a bigger house, having more durables in the house, having a plasma TV. And so this is the income effect from basic microeconomics. This is the angle curve of how urbanization maps into a bigger carbon footprint. And so I absolutely agree. When I ran through the algebra and hypnotized everyone, my point is this. She gave several excellent examples of how our electricity, so she's basically relabeling the bottom row as electricity consumption. The electricity consumption in a city is the number of people who live there. You can multiply that by their income per capita, multiplied by their energy consumption per dollar of income. And that would be N times P times M. The key issue from a greenhouse gas issue is, for all that electricity consumption, if Los Angeles had 8 million Kobe Bryants living here in 8,000 square foot homes, there could still be a 0 carbon emissions footprint if all of the electricity came from renewables, the G. If our emissions per unit of electricity were 0. And so she's absolutely right, but it's the same idea, again, of scale versus technique, and of how we trigger induced innovation. To take a Kobe Bryant, you can make Kobe Bryant have a small carbon footprint, either by cutting him and making him play for the development league, tough crowd, or by going through a very strenuous divorce, or by greening the technology he uses. And that's the choice we face. Are you going to ask China to stop growing right now? Are we going to get on the train of having an innovative world economy? Those are the 2 paths, whether it's Kobe Bryant or China, it's the same algebra again.
Okay. Yes.
So the growth and like getting richer and all of this stuff is really great for China and the Chinese people. But the concern I would have is the problem being handed off to other places. I mean, as they get richer, part of what is allowing them to get richer is the decrease in the price of what they're paying for and exporting their manufacturing industries, exporting where they get their resources for as they demand more. So they're sort of handing off the problem to other parts of the world, maybe Africa, Southeast Asia, Central America, and they're not going to be, if they're incentivized to provide cheaper goods for their population, they're not going to be concerned with making high environmental standards, things that cost a lot of money in those countries. So those countries are going to start to, as they urbanize, as they manufacture for China's population, they're going to have to deal with the local environmental pollution problems that the Chinese people have been dealing with before their, or during their economic growth. So I don't know, where does the cycle end?
So I'm very sympathetic to big chunks of what you just said. So to slightly rephrase his point, he just walked us through a possible pollution haven argument. As China gets richer, they got rich with dirty manufacturing. Now that they're getting rich, will the dirty manufacturing then move on to Africa? And so the one thing I would say there, you're hinting that it's a zero-sum game. That one place makes progress because another place gets dirtier. I'm going to come back to endogenous innovation again. I'm like a broken record. If we as a globe make progress, so folks, think of a personal computer. Think of did anyone here have a 386 computer recently versus the computers folks have? Of the progress we make, airplanes per mile of travel are crashing less often. I don't want to overdo the optimism. But if our factories make progress, there's no law of physics that a steel factory always has to produce 300 units of pollution. If our engineers make progress at the technological frontier, those ideas can be brought to Africa. The IMF and World Bank could build a frontier factory there, depending on what the fixed cost and variable cost is for bringing that best technology over. If we never made any technological progress in emissions abatement, then you're certainly right that you get into this offshoring zero-sum game. But the possibility that an African nation might adopt in a dirty industry the cleanest technology would be one way for me to get out of the nice trap you've set. The other point I would make is freedom of choice. I have never been to Africa, but there's poor nations in Africa. You get back to my Faustian bargain slide at the start of our talk today. If in Africa, if an African nation is a democracy, and if the median voter says we understand the pollution we're importing, but we value these jobs, there's an interesting question of whether there's gains to trade. If the place is a dictatorship and this is rammed down, saying to the people, you get the dirty factory and the king's going to take the money, then no economist is going to support that. But there's a question of why that African nation was willing to enter that trade, and if they're willing to, who are we in the US to block that? There's a question of what's the alternative. And that's sort of the philosophical debate that environmental economists have.
We have time for one last question, and trying to go in order. I believe your hand was up, and I apologize if I didn't call that correctly. We'll give you the last word.
All right, I guess I have two main criticisms of what you said. My first would be that you sort of ignore a lot of market failures, except for externalities. You talk about putting a price on carbon as one market failure, but particularly in your example about the shark fin soup, the tragedy of the commons is based on the idea that like the oceans are this common access resource, that oftentimes the market signals come too late. So people will keep fishing until basically you're at the point where like the ecology and the economy are about to collapse. And so I don't really buy your argument that the market will solve everything. That's why places where fisheries have been saved, we have things like quotas and government systems in place. So I just think that maybe it's because you didn't have enough time, but market.
Oh, I didn't say so. But notice what you just did. You had government step in. So I didn't say that there's no. So you have nicely brought government to the rescue, And so but my colleague Ben Zuckerman said we will end up with no sharks. I just heard you say government would sense using GPS that the shark count is down and would take actions to limit access.
But the way you had framed it was in a way as though the market would solve. You didn't actually.
If it were private property, so we have two ways to solve the problem. We could privatize the ocean, which would be the efficient way to do it, or we could do it the planning way and let government in. Both will achieve the goal. The government solution will be more costly, but both will achieve the goal. Yes, it's but notice that Travis's doom does not take place. We didn't pass that point of no return. You're an optimist too, but government is your James Bond. Mine is more of an anonymous, invisible hand. But we both agree.
You must acknowledge that if we privatize the ocean, there's probably going to be a lot of other problems involved in somebody owning that piece of ocean. Probably won't.
Not if it was UCLA.
And can I just think the second part? I mean, you have a very high faith in new technology and innovation, and I'm just a bit hesitant about sort of placing all that faith in that control because we don't really know exactly what new technology is going to be.
Oh, you're a Luddite.
And yes, I am. And also that new technology often brings new problems. Like, you know, solar panels are great, but what do we do when, you know, they've worn out, like the product to recycle it, to dispose of it can be very problematic. And so new technology does bring new problems.
You are right, but if a smart young person like you anticipates that, you have new opportunities for the market that there will be for the dummies who didn't anticipate what you anticipate. And so in a 7 billion person world, I just need a couple of people like you. If you're not able to vote this into place, you'll be able to innovate and be very rich as you anticipate a challenge that I was too dumb to anticipate. And so in a diverse world, I need just a few people like you. And you need a venture capitalist, and together you will be very rich in anticipating that one. I could flip things around, and suppose you're right, that I am absolutely wrong, that we can't innovate and reduce pollution per unit of activity. You're saying that from these two pictures, I'm over-inferring the ability for progress. And if you're right about that, then we get into issues that we would once we learn the day of reckoning that you've already anticipated. There's a book by Diane Coyle called Enough, which I reviewed for the Princeton Press, of how could we reimagine our lives not so American dream. And if you're right that we can't innovate our way out like Houdini out of a box, then coming back to Travis's point, we would have to change our aspirations. And there I agree with you.
Neither of those charts was the free market the solution.
So there is pro-government in the room, but government is an emergent property. Folks, the reason the Air Resources Board was able to bring this about is the California tax base. Kobe Bryant making $12 million a year, me making $2 million a year at UCLA, gives Sacramento, folks aren't laughing, gives Sacramento the money after it taxes to hire smart young people to work for it to make this happen. And so Andre Schleifer of Harvard had a great paper that richer nations have better governance. You pay your judges and police more, they shoot fewer people in the back, they do their job. And so there's an interesting stop videotaping me. There's an interesting simultaneity. Better governance leads to more income, and more income leads to better governance. And so you guys are advocating a government role, but for the government to be able to do their job, there does have to be an economic backbone to pay the salaries you would demand to work for it.
Okay.
But thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you once again.